I loved more than life itself, was hiding a deadly secret while sleeping with other men, I would have laughed in their faces. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't knock, it kicks the door down when you least expect it. For years, I thought I had the perfect marriage. My wife, Claire, was the kind of woman people admired. She was smart, quick-witted, and had this way of lighting up a room without even trying. Whenever we went to parties or gatherings, people would always tell me how lucky I was to have her. And I believed them. Why wouldn't I? She was my partner, my best friend, my everything. Our life looked great from the outside. We had a nice home and steady careers, and we hardly ever argued. I spent most of my time working, traveling for business, but I always felt like I was working for us, building a good life together. When I'd come home from those long trips, she'd welcome me with a smile, make me my favorite meals, and tell me how much she missed me. I thought I was living the dream. But the thing about dreams is that they can trick you into ignoring reality. If I'm honest with myself, there were signs, small ones, quiet ones, but I didn't pay attention. For starters, we hadn't been intimate in a long time. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Life gets busy, right? Work, responsibilities, bills. It's normal, I told myself. But after a while, it stopped feeling normal. I tried to initiate something, and she'd brush me off, saying she wasn't in the mood or wasn't feeling well. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It became the norm. Eventually, I stopped trying, and so did she. I figured maybe we were just going through a rough patch. Another thing that sticks out now is how she reacted when I had to leave for business trips. Most people hate being apart from their spouse for weeks at a time. But Claire? She seemed relieved. I'd tell her I had a trip coming up, and she'd act disappointed at first. But the second she thought I wasn't looking, she reversed to her normal mood. At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing. I even joked about it. "You're going to miss me, aren't you?" And she'd laugh and tell me, "Of course I will." I wanted to believe her, so I did. Now, when I think back, those moments feel like bright neon signs I ignored. Her pulling away from me, her excitement when I was gone, it all makes sense now. But back then, I was blind to it. I wanted to believe that the woman I loved could never do anything to hurt me. If I'd known then what I know now, maybe I would have done things differently. Maybe I would have paid closer attention. But life doesn't work like that. You don't see the cracks until the foundation is already crumbling beneath your feet. I came home early that day. It wasn't planned. I'd wrapped up my meetings ahead of schedule and thought I'd surprise my wife. Just a little gesture. It had been a few weeks since I'd seen her, and I missed her. I imagined her smiling as I walked through the door, maybe even joking about how I could never stick to my schedule. That's what I thought would happen. But when I opened the door, something felt off. The house was too quiet. No sound of the TV, no music, nothing. I found her lying on the couch, pale, sweating, barely able to keep her eyes open. She looked fragile, like the life had been drained out of her. I called her name, but her voice was faint, barely a whisper. She just said, "I don't feel good." I didn't waste time. I grabbed my keys and rushed her to the hospital. At that point, I didn't know what was wrong, but seeing her like that scared me. It wasn't like the flu or a bad cold. Something deeper was going on. The doctors ran a bunch of tests. I paced around the waiting room, texting family members, trying to stay calm. After what felt like hours, the doctor came out and asked to speak to me privately. That's when I started to panic. I kept thinking, what's wrong with her? Did something happen while I was gone? When the doctor told me she had AIDS, I froze. My first reaction? Total disbelief. I mean, how could that be possible? My wife? The woman I'd shared my life with? I told him, that's got to be a mistake. But he was calm, factual, and firm. There was no mistake. She had AIDS. I remember standing there, feeling like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My hands were shaking. I couldn't wrap my head around it. 1,000 questions hit me all at once. How? When? Why didn't she tell me? What does this mean for me? It felt like my whole world had just stopped. When I went back to see her, she looked up at me with this tired, almost defeated expression. I could tell she knew I'd found out. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't even flinch when I asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" And that's when it all came out. She admitted to everything. The cheating. The lies. She told me she had been sleeping with other men, especially when I was away for work. She said she thought it was harmless, just a distraction, she called it. But one of those men, she didn't know which one, had infected her with HIV. And she'd known about it for months. Months. When I asked why she hid it, her voice cracked. She said she didn't want to lose me. She said she was ashamed, that she didn't know how to tell me. She told me she'd been trying to figure it out, but every time she thought about saying the words, she froze. And then she said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. "That's why I've been distant," she said. "That's why I didn't want to be with you like that anymore. I didn't want to risk giving it to you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those nights I thought she was just tired or stressed. All those times I convinced myself our intimacy issues were because of my work schedule. None of it was real. She'd been hiding this from me, letting me live in the dark. I stood there, staring at her, and I couldn't find the words. All I could think was, if I hadn't come home early, would she have ever told me? Or would she have kept lying until the end? That day, my perfect marriage, the life I thought I had, shattered into a million pieces. And I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. Living in that house, after finding out the truth, was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I thought the worst part was the moment she told me she'd cheated, confessing in that hospital bed, weak and sick, with tears streaming down her face. But it turns out the aftermath was even worse. Every day was like walking through the wreckage of something that had once been beautiful. I avoided her as much as I could. At first, it was easy because she was still recovering, mostly sleeping or too weak to leave the bedroom. But when she started feeling better, every interaction felt unbearable. I moved into the guest room without a word. She didn't ask why, but we both knew. I'd leave early for work and come home late, just to keep the hours we spent under the same roof as short as possible. And when I was home, I'd go for long walks. Sometimes an hour, sometimes two. I didn't even have a destination, I just didn't want to be there. She tried to talk to me a few times. She'd come into the kitchen while I was eating dinner or catch me in the hallway. She'd start saying how sorry she was, how much she regretted everything. But I'd shut her down every time. I couldn't handle hearing her excuses. I couldn't look at her without seeing the lies, the betrayal, the men she was with while I was working halfway across the country, trying to build a life for us. And the thing is, I could tell she was sorry. It wasn't fake or forced. She'd sit at the edge of the couch, quiet, almost shrinking into herself. Sometimes I'd catch her crying when she thought I wasn't around. But her remorse didn't undo what she'd done. It didn't erase the secret she kept, or the fact that she only told me because the disease forced her hand. If I hadn't come home early that day, I'd still be in the dark. That thought alone made my stomach turn every time I looked at her. That house started to feel like a prison. Every room had memories of us, happy ones, that were now tainted. The kitchen, where we'd laugh while cooking together. The living room where we used to binge-watch shows. Even our bedroom, which now felt like a graveyard for a marriage that had been dead long before I realized it. So, I started planning my way out. Quietly. She didn't know, but I'd already spoken to a lawyer and started looking for apartments. I wasn't in a rush. Not because I was unsure, but because leaving her while she was still recovering felt wrong. I didn't want to be cruel. For all her faults, and there were many, I couldn't bring myself to walk out when she was still so weak. But in my mind, I'd already left. The marriage was over the second I found out the truth. I was just waiting for her body to catch up with what her choices had already done to my heart. I'll admit it, I was terrified. After everything I'd learned, the thought of going to get tested for HIV felt like walking into a firing squad. My wife had already dropped the bombshell. She had been living with this disease for who knows how long, hiding it from me, all while sleeping with other men. The worst part? She couldn't even tell me how, or when it started. It didn't matter how careful she claimed to be with me. The damage had already been done in my head. I couldn't stop thinking, what if I have it too? For a whole month I did nothing. Absolutely nothing. I kept telling myself I'd go to the clinic tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. But every time I got close to making an appointment, my chest tightened, and I'd find an excuse. What if it's positive? What will I do? How do I tell my family? My friends? The questions played on a loop in my mind. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like the walls were closing in. Every cough, every scratch in my throat, every time I felt a little off, I thought, is this it? Is it starting? Even though the rational part of me knew the symptoms wouldn't show up that quickly, my brain wouldn't let me rest. I was imagining the worst-case scenario over and over, like a movie that never ended. Some nights I thought about the future, what my life would look like if I was positive. Would I even want to keep living? I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept creeping back. At work, I was distracted. I couldn't focus. I'd find myself staring out the window, replaying every moment in my marriage, wondering how I didn't see the signs. I was angry, sure, but mostly I was scared. I felt like my whole life had been thrown into a blender, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't piece anything back together. Finally, after weeks of spiraling, I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't keep living in this limbo. The not knowing was killing me more than any diagnosis ever could. So I made the call. I booked the appointment. Sitting in that clinic waiting for my results was probably the longest hour of my life. The nurse called my name, and I swear my legs felt like they were made of concrete as I walked to her office. She asked me to sit, and I could barely hear what she was saying over the pounding of my own heart. When she told me I was negative, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Relief doesn't even begin to cover it. It was like someone had taken a weight off my chest that I didn't even realize I was carrying. For the first time in weeks, I could think clearly. But that relief didn't last long. Almost immediately, it was replaced by anger. A deep, burning anger that I couldn't shake. Not just at my wife, though she deserved plenty of it, but at the men she cheated with. I don't know who they are, and frankly, I don't care. But at that moment, I hated them all. I hated the fact that they walked into my life, tore apart my marriage, and left without a scratch. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces. I remember thinking, I hope they enjoy the results of the pleasure they had. Sarcastic, I know, but that's where my head was. These men? They didn't just betray their own relationships, if they had any. They helped ruin mine. And now, they might be carrying the same disease they helped spread. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I walked out of that clinic feeling two things. Thankful that I was free of the disease and determined to never let myself be blindsided like this again. I didn't know what was next for me, but I knew one thing for sure. My life with her was over. When she finally started looking better, eating, moving around the house, even smiling here and there, I knew it was time to have the conversation I had been rehearsing in my head for weeks. I sat her down at the kitchen table. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. She froze, staring at me like she couldn't quite process the words. Then the tears came. These were full-on, chest-heaving sobs. But I wasn't going to back down. Not after everything that happened. "Please," she said, barely able to get the word out between her crying. "We can fix this. I made mistakes, I know I did, but I still love you. I'll do anything." I wanted to feel something when she said that. Maybe pity. Maybe anger. But honestly, I felt nothing. It was like a switch had been flipped, and I was just done. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her the truth. "You lied to me? For years. You cheated on me. You put my life at risk, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me the truth when you found out you were sick. You only told me because you had no choice." Her sobs got louder, and I had to fight the urge to say anything mean. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "I'm just tired. And I can't stay here, pretending like we can rebuild something that's already burned to the ground." She begged. She pleaded. She even got on her knees at one point, grabbing my hands and begging me to give her one more chance. But it was over. I knew it, and deep down I think she did too. The day I packed my things felt like burying a version of myself that I'd never get back. I didn't take much, just my clothes, my laptop, and a few personal items. Everything else I left behind. The house, the furniture, the photos on the walls. I didn't want any of it anymore. When I finally walked out the front door, I didn't look back. But sometimes, walking away is the only choice you have. Because staying in a place that hurts you, no matter how much history it holds, will only break you more. I don't hate her. I don't think I ever could. But I can't forgive her either. I never thought I'd find myself here, sharing the wreckage of my life with strangers. But if my story can stop just one person from making the same mistakes or being blindsided like I was, then maybe it's worth it. Let me say this as plainly as I can. Infidelity isn't just a betrayal of love. It's a betrayal of trust, of loyalty, and sometimes of life itself. My wife's actions didn't just break my heart. They shattered my ability to believe in the one thing I thought would always be unshakable: us. She risked her life for moments of fleeting pleasure. And in doing so, she risked my life too. When you marry someone, you put your faith in them. You trust that they'll protect you, just as you'd protect them. But when that trust is violated, it doesn't just hurt, it leaves scars. I'm grateful, if that's the right word, that I tested negative. But that relief didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the sleepless nights I spent wondering if I'd contracted the same disease she was hiding. It didn't take away the shame I felt for staying silent as she lay in that hospital bed, confessing to things I'll never forget. If you're listening to this, I need you to hear me. Cheating isn't just selfish, it's dangerous. It doesn't just ruin love. It can ruin lives. I don't care what excuse someone has, boredom, loneliness, whatever. It's never worth putting someone else's health, safety, and heart on the line. I won't pretend I've moved on completely. Trust is something I'm still working on. I still catch myself second-guessing people's intentions, wondering if there's another secret waiting to drop. I hate that I've become that person, but at the same time I know I did what I needed to do. Walking away from her, from us, was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the only way I could begin to heal. So, if there's one thing you take away from this, let it be this. If you're unhappy, talk to your partner. If you feel tempted to cheat, ask yourself if the risk is worth losing everything you've built. And if you're already in too deep, stop. Stop before you destroy someone who trusted you with their whole heart. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of this story? Do you think I made the right decision to walk away? Or should I have stayed and tried to fix things? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear what you'd do if you were in my shoes. And if this story resonates with you, or you've been through something similar, feel free to share your experience too. Who knows? Maybe your words will help someone else out there.